What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I would like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. On today's episode, we've got on a very special guest. He is an entrepreneur, a hedge fund manager, a high-stakes poker player, and also a film producer and author of the book Die with Zero. This is Bill Perkins. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
No doubt. It's an honor to have you, Bill. So I've done a brief intro there. You do a whole lot of things, but for people who are not familiar with you, tell them a little bit about who you are.
Well, I'm Bill Perkins. I was born and raised in Jersey City. Went to school, University of Iowa. I got my start as like an assistant peon in the energy industry, basically sneaking sandwiches onto the exchange floor. Worked my way up to basically having my own hedge fund where I speculate on natural gas derivatives, trade options, etc. When I started making money, I was like, oh, what are rich people supposed to do? I was like, I was trying to figure it out. I made some movies, right? I always wanted, everybody, I think when they were a kid, either wanted to be a fireman, astronaut, or a movie star. So I started producing movies, which I enjoyed, but it takes a lot of your time. I do venture capital work, investing. I'm very much into charities that support adoption,
Okay.
or communities. Just kind of all around, just winging life, trying to figure it out, modeling my life, trying to figure it out, and making sure I get the most out of it, out of each stage of my life.
That's awesome, man. Well, there's a lot to talk about there. I love speaking to people like yourself because there's so many different angles we can go at. I'd like to rewind and kind of go back to your earlier life before we talk about some of the stuff you're doing now. So tell me a little bit about your sort of childhood and growing up. What was that like?
So I grew up pretty like middle class. My dad had gotten a scholarship to the University of Iowa, played pro for a little bit, like back in the leather helmet days, right? Before there was a Super Bowl, and then went and got a law license. And so I grew up in a very diverse community in Jersey City back in, 70s, 80s, revealing my age. And so I was pretty much, I think I was a bright kid, but I was a slacker. I didn't really get along with my dad. He was a very, very tough nut to crack because he came from a very, very tough period. And that's the way he was raised. And I went to school for electrical engineering, was really just a slacker and chased women and played football. Right? I mean, my grades, they're terrible. They're just worst student ever, right? Yeah. And then got out and was poor and was just like, oh, this isn't going to cut it, right? Like it was that uncoddling from college that kind of really like said, hey, whatever potential you have, you need to start applying yourself and creating your own luck and doing the things that you read about, et cetera. And so when I got introduced to the exchange as a clerk, even though I was a peon, I loved it. I really loved it because I had this idea in my head that I didn't want a cookie cutter life. I didn't want like the picket fence, et cetera. I just knew I wanted to be able to do what I want to do, right? Whatever I thought that was. And I had this idea in my head that financial trading, leverage, money would allow me to do those things. So instead of saying, oh, I'm going to go to Hollywood and I'm going to learn how to be a director and producer and work my way up, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go get the money. And then if I want to produce or make a movie, I can make a movie. You know what I mean? Monies make movie. Yeah. Monies make movies, sorry. And so that was kind of my thought process, is that acquire enough capital so that you can do the things you want, right? Like if you're Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, and there's a starving village in Africa or a starving thing problem, you have the resource, you can fix it. You don't have to lobby anybody. You don't have to do anything. You can fix it yourself, right? Because of the capital you've amassed in your primary job, right? In your area of expertise. And so that was kind of my thoughts is like, I can solve problems. I can entertain myself. I can do all these other things if I just find the right field with enough leverage and make a bunch of money.
Awesome. How did you have that realization? Was there a certain point? You said you were a bad student, you were kind of a slacker, and then you went and you started to work in the finance world. But was there a particular moment where you just thought, okay, this is a change in my life philosophy here? Because what you just described there isn't the way most people, it's not the way most people think or the way most people sort of operate or think about the future. So where did that come from?
I think it wasn't like one particular moment. I think these things were being seeded in my head with books I read, Your Money or Your Life, Think and Grow Rich, and then particularly movies and culture at the time. And this movie Wall Street was out at the time, right? And it was Bad Gordon Gekko and Bud Fox. But the thing that struck me, it was like, oh, like being rich, like you get the girl, you get the car, the jet, you know, you had this life that, you know, I aspired to, because really, I wasn't really thinking about what I really wanted. I was being advertised what I thought I wanted, right? And that drove me. That resonated with me. Even though I was picking the wrong things, like when I finally could afford a Lamborghini, I bought one. I felt like an asshole. I couldn't stand the car. I was like, I feel like such a douche. Sorry. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Douche is fine. Douche is fine.
sorry. I felt like such a pickle driving around in this car. Like I just could not legitimately pull up in this car. And so I realized, like, I don't really like cars. I was being advertised like cars. But when I had to, like, you know, stay at home with my mom, sleep on the train when I didn't have enough money to get home and couldn't jump because they guarded it, etc. Those were very motivating, like, get your stuff together type events, which gave me kind of that necessity and hunger to go after what I wanted, right? To take the risk, to knuckle down, to not go out and party when it was time to party, to start segmenting and organizing my life, you know, so that I can have a chance at hitting a home run.
I hear you. So there's someone who's listening to this right now and they're just thinking, wait, hang on. How did you even afford your first Lamborghini? So how did you get to a stage to even buy your first Lamborghini?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm in trading, right? And like I say, a lot of people ask me, how do you get rich? And I said, well, I think you apply leverage and you be right? When you have leverage, that's how most fortunes are made, right? Like when people say get rich in real estate, nobody's putting down $300,000 and then flipping the house for $330,000. They're putting down $30,000, right? 10% of the value of the house. And then so when that house goes up 10%, they make 100%, right? And why I use real estate as an example is that's one of the few fields where the average person can get leveraged. That's why, at least in the States, you see all these advertising, how I got rich in real estate, cash flow down, et cetera, right? Because people have access to the tools in order to get rich. Now, it works wonderful when you're right, but when you're wrong, you go broke, right? And so I was in a field where a niche market, natural gas trading, where there was lots of leverage, right? Commodities trading is a leverage field, right? You only have to put down a portion of the value of the contract, right? And on top of that, I was working for a firm. So I even had more leverage, right? Like the worst that could happen to me was I would get fired, right? But I was getting a percentage of what I made. So I had my own little business within a business and I was levered up.
Gotcha.
And I was right. You know, I was right more than I was wrong, right? Every trader is wrong, right? And so, and I got wealthy.
Awesome.
I got wealthy trading natural gas.
Awesome. And what was well, firstly, congratulations. That's and what was the next step? What was the next step after that? Actually, firstly, before that, when you say you got wealthy, you don't have to specifically say a number, but when you say you got wealthy, what does that actually mean to you? Because I think that word has different meanings to different people, just like success. When was it you felt, okay, I'm wealthy and or I'm successful?
I think when I was, you know, I was a broker first, which I absolutely hated being a broker, even though I was good at it. Like I was making in ancient times and, you know, in the 90s, right? Early 90s, I was making $250,000 a year plus brokering, but I was dependent on other people's mood, right? I have to call somebody up. Hey, I got this market, you blah, blah, blah. And their cat died. They didn't hate me for, you know, they didn't like me for whatever reason. I was completely dependent on other people. At least that's the way I felt, right? I mean, obviously it's some skill and some smoozing, but I hated that. I just liked it to figure out and solve puzzles. Like I'm addicted to solving puzzles. And so I didn't feel wealthy then, but when I was trading and I made enough money that I had to reevaluate the things I want because I had enough.
Yes.
And I was like, here, mom, here's some money for whatever, and here, whatever. And I didn't really care. I was like, okay, I've reached the milestone, right? I want to make $1 million a year before I'm 30. And then it was to the point where it was like, I had, you know, it's kind of on autopilot, but we had this like financial advisor lady come in and says, well, what are your retirement goals? Whatever. I was like, well, as long as I can have $40,000 a year, you know, off of interest, I'm fine. I'm good.
Yeah.
I don't need more than that. They were like, well, you can quit right now. I was like, I didn't do the math, right? I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Interest rates are 6 or 7% right now, right?
Yeah.
It's back in early 90s when there wasn't 0 interest percent rates. And I was just like, oh, I got to reevaluate my goals, right? Because I was just still addicted to solving puzzles in natural gas. I wasn't really thinking about the arc of my life, what I really wanted, what does that 40,000 really represent? What am I going to buy? What am I going to do? What kind of vacations am I going to take? What kind of charities am I going to help? Those type of things I wasn't really thinking about. I was just throwing out an arbitrary number, right? Looking at like what the median salary was for a person working in the United States was, and be like, oh, okay, yeah, a little above that, I'm fine.
Gotcha.
Right.
I hear you. And so what came next after that? So you did the energy trading, working in the markets, and then what was the next step of your career after that?
Well, I continued to do that. At the same time, I was working on infrastructure projects, trying to do these like big, giant LNG importation facilities, just dreaming really big, right? Above my shoes, like trying to accomplish like the near impossible. And I was still trading, working for a firm called Centaurus, which was extremely successful hedge fund trading. My book was extremely successful doing there until my friend who started it, Called in Rich, quit and said, I'm going into philanthropy. Right. And then I started my own hedge fund, which I still run today.
Okay.
But on the side, and, you know, I was making movies and doing development projects and investing and just trying to figure it out. Right. Like a lot of things, I always tell people life is discovery. You don't know what you want. You discover what you want. So I was shotgun approach out there, you know, movies and let's do a record and let's invest in this and let's, you know, just trying to find out what I like and what I truly enjoyed, as opposed to what had been advertised to me what I'm supposed to like. You know, like you're supposed to like a Lamborghini and a McLaren. I was like, I hate having these cars. I'm not a car guy. I thought I was a car guy. I'm not a car guy, right? Yeah. And so, you know, I was just like, but that's what I've been advertised to my whole life, right? Like if wealth, you watch a rap video, the guy rolls up in the fancy car, he's got the fancy watch and the thing, and I'm like, okay, I got money. Maybe I'm supposed to have the fancy car and the fancy thing. I get it. And I'm like, I hate this shit.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Sorry, guys, I'm terrible. I am terrible.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's okay, man. So that's interesting. So you worked out after a while that, okay, you don't just want these material things that have been advertised to you and sort of put out there to the general public. What is it that does drive you now? Or what did you figure out does drive you?
So it took a like throughout my life, even before when I had zero money, right? Like literally negative net worth. I was always thinking about what is it all for?
Yeah.
Like I know I need to work to survive, right? I got to pay bills and eat, etc. But like even when I look at these people who are successful and rich, right? Like, do I just want a bigger house? Like what am I going to convert that money into? What are the things I really want? And I didn't really have answers because I didn't have that much exposure, right? All I had was like advertisement, et cetera. But that question, I think, resonates with almost everyone. Like, what is their purpose? What am I doing here? Like, why am I going to work? Like, what am I going to do with this money? If I won the lottery, like, what am I going to do with it? Like, besides first you go bananas and throw a party and champagne and whatever it is, you know what I mean? The club, you know, it's like, what do you want? And that was a really big question for me, and it was a rabbit hole because it was like, there's a very important that comes to what you want. It's when do you want it, right? Because it was like, hey, I don't want to be in a club popping bottles at 75, right?
Yep.
And I know I can't, you know, like as I get older, I'm like, I know my health is going to deteriorate. So there's certain things that, you know, I can't do that I used to do that I used to love, right? So then I realized like every activity that I want or that I'm going to think about has a season, right? And if I'm going to optimize my life, right? If I'm going to try and get the most out of it, I don't need to be delaying certain activities till I'm 75, and certain activity, you know, they need to be pulled forward and certain activities need to be pushed back, right? Like I'm not going hiking Everest when I have two small children, right? Like that's either gonna have to push it. And if it pushes too far, I won't be able to make it up the mountain, right? And so these are the questions that I was kind of like asking myself that, you know, that are answered in the book and like my philosophy and the thoughts that I stumbled on to like how we can look at our lives from now to the grave and then optimize so we get the most out of our life, right?
Yeah.
With our health, right? Like you're big in health, right? And you know that when you're healthy, everything is better. Every experience you do is better, right? Yeah. But even for like the most healthy person, they will decline, right? So like when I'm in Europe, I like to walk. I used to walk 12 miles a day. You really get to know a city, walking around, find things, stuff like that. And now it's not comfortable. It's not as enjoyable to walk 12 miles a day for me, right?
I hear you.
I got knees, you know, a knee injury, back injury, et cetera. So maybe it's 7, maybe it's 6. So the experience points, I call them, that I get for each experience as my health declines goes down to the point where no matter how much money I have, I can't really get any enjoyment out of it, right? On your deathbed, you can spend $1 trillion. You're not getting any enjoyment out of it.
Yeah.
Like when you're 1 year old, you spend $1 trillion, you're just going to gum the paper, right? Like, so, so there's this arc, there's this natural curve of when you're supposed to be spending your money and how you're supposed to be deploying your resources. And that's the question I've been wrestling with for a long time.
I hear you. And that leads into the concept of your recent book, which is Die with Zero. So what's the whole concept and philosophy behind that?
Yeah, the book is basically, you know, it has a very scary title to kind of get people's attention because, you know, there's like 2 million books in print, right? We're all trying to get like very few people read books, but it's really Die with Zero Regrets, right? Okay. And you can't die with zero regrets, but it's about modeling your life from now to the grave. So whether you're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, right? Starting from now, saying, okay, what is it do I want out of life? When is the optimal time for me to use my resources, spend my money, basically, okay, for the experiences I want at each time in my life, right? So that a season of your life, say when you have small kids, doesn't pass and you're going, wait, I want to go to Disney World with my kids. Well, it's too late. The Disney World where your kids' time has passed. Or I want to go play football. Sorry, you pulled your hamstring or threw out your back first 5 yards, right? Because you're too old to do X, Y, and Z. And I use those examples, but there's millions of examples of kind of ordering your life. Like life is like Tetris, right? Okay. That game, if you don't get the order right, you don't get as much to do, right? You got to get the order right to get the high score. Right? Like you got to get the order of the events of your life right to get the high score. And this book is about getting off autopilot, thinking about what you really want in life, and getting the maximum fulfillment you can.
I hear that. So I think that in this time we live in, especially, I think in the last sort of 10 to 20 years, maybe it's been going on beyond that. But I think especially now when I look at, you know, I'm 34. But especially when I look at, you know, even people within my own generation, but especially people who might be a decade to 2 decades younger than me, I have certain concerns, right? I think that there's earlier we were talking about meaning and purpose. You were talking about trying to find your meaning, trying to find your purpose. And I feel like for a lot of young men and women, especially right now, whether they're in their teenage years or early teens, or perhaps even in their 30s, I feel like there's this sort of void. There's like a purpose void. I think a lot of young men don't really know what they're supposed to be doing. I think the sort of role of men in society used to be a lot more obvious. And in a lot of other countries, I think it's still a lot more obvious. Whereas if you live in the USA, if you live in the UK, Canada, parts of Europe, it's a little bit confusing for a lot of people. And I feel the same for young women as well. So number one, I'm curious to know your thoughts on that. But also for someone who might be listening to this, I don't know, who's a 21-year-old guy or perhaps even a 21-year-old woman who is just kind of looking at their future, trying to work out how to put their life together like Tetris, as you were saying. What sort of thoughts or advice would you have for them?
Wow, that is one of the things I realized, like writing this book is difficult because even though I give the advice, it's even hard to follow your own advice. Like you're you do training, right? Like
Yep.
you got to do this 20 times, whatever. You realize that's difficult even for you, right? Like when you're doing it. And so I think the thing is the first is to lose fear. A lot of fear. I think people have a lot of fear in expressing what they really want to do or taking the risks, excuse me, that they should be doing.
Yeah.
Whether that be in their love life, career, etc. Like, oh, I don't want to move to a new town. I don't know anybody, right? I hear that often. People get offered jobs or an opportunity here, and they're like, well, I don't know anybody.
Of course you don't.
It's really just people. You're not going to be alone, right?
Yeah.
Sorry. So one thing is, I would say is first address what are your fears? Are you afraid of being alone? Are you afraid of not having money? Are you afraid of X, Y, and Z? And think about what's that stopping you from doing? Because I think a lot of people have a calling or an idea, like I want to go travel the world, or I just want to do X, Y, and Z, or I want to work here, or I want to go. And there's something holding them back, which they will assign as like a risk or it doesn't work, but really it's just fear.
Yeah.
And as far as like the cultural shift of like what your role is, et cetera, that's definitely happened. I definitely feel what you're talking about. Like I have issues. Like I'm old school, right? I was raised in a different era, right? Of different roles. I have a different idea that has been beaten into me of what it means to be a man. And there are new ideas and new ways. And, you know, I might say my way is right and this is the better way, but I'm biased, right? Like that's because, you know what I mean? I've had many, many years of that being inculcated into my psyche. And so, you know, I'm a big freedom guy. Like be who you want to be, do what you want to do as long as you don't hurt others. And so sometimes it's hard for me to find it palatable some of these other ways. But when I put it from the lens of freedom, it's much easier for me to accept and get along. And I'm like, okay, but how is this going to work with yourself, your neighbors, your friends, and society at large?
Yeah.
Right.
When you say freedom, what specifically do you mean there? Because it's a bit of like a lot of words in the English language, I think it's one of those words that means very different things to different people. So I think when some people hear the word freedom, they sort of pair it with a personal responsibility, which I think is very important. Whereas I think some people think of freedom almost as like an absence of personal responsibility and sort of almost more like nihilistic, hedonistic, just kind of, just go off, go crazy, do whatever. Whereas for other people, it's more like, okay, you know, having enough finances or having a career set up so that you can just be free and be autonomous to travel to different places and earn in different places. So what does freedom mean to you?
In my context is freedom from negative things, like like negative, right? So freedom from being molested, harassed, shamed for your choices, you know? And in this sense, I mean, there's, you know, when I take financial freedom, it's the freedom to have enough plus a little bit more, so you can do whatever you want, right? But in these choices, such that when you make a choice, like if you want to, you know, culturally, we're talking about culture. If you want to marry same sex or you want to do X, Y, and Z, you should be free to do that. It doesn't hurt, as long as you're not harming other person or taking from another person. I'm like, that's your choice, and I'm not here to shame you. Right? You can live your life and choose your life for what's going on. So a lot of it's freedom from, right?
Yes, I get you.
Freedom from negative consequences, being molested, being searched and seized, somebody telling you what to do, what to put in your body, what not to put in your body, etc. Right?
I understand.
So that's kind of where I'm heading with that. But you know, when we're talking financial freedom, it's like the ability to purchase other people's life energy or their time to perform the task for you that you want done.
That's an interesting way to put it. I've never heard it phrased that way.
Yeah, like when you go to the dentist, like you're buying his time. When you fly a plane, you're buying multiple people's time. They fractionate it out, right? The miracle of money is that we can now take other people's life energy, have it representative in terms of dollars, which is easy to exchange around, right? When I need a lawyer, I buy his time. When I go buy a movie ticket, well, it's the actor's time, so and so's time. film operator's time, this guy's time, etc. And so, I want to get into, when I say freedom, like leverage, freedom is like I have the ability to buy the people's times to do what I need to get done that I want to do.
I hear that. Another interesting cultural shift that is happening, and I guess this isn't new. It's something that sort of seems to cycle around over the centuries and the millennia, is this whole eat the rich mentality, the billionaire hating mentality, the anti-capitalist mentality, the sort of money is evil mentality. It's something I see, again, springing up primarily amongst the younger generation. In fact, there's sort of this rising socialist wave. And, if you're on social media, you see a lot of this, like,
I've had a lot of those guys.
Yeah. I'm sure you do. So what are your, I have my thoughts on that, which I'd be happy to share, but what are your thoughts on that whole mentality of just, billionaires shouldn't exist and money is evil and capitalism is the source of all these problems and everything like that?
It's a lot to unpack there, but okay. I'll go backwards. Like billionaires, I'm like, of course they should exist. He exists. He keeps a fraction of the value he provides. Right? Let's say I go till a banana farm. I build all these bananas, etc. I put the money in art, whatever. Then I sell all these bananas, and I sell 3 billion bananas, and I have expenses, paid all the people, distribution, and I pocket $1 billion. So I shouldn't have $1 billion for the value I provided. Like, unless you stole the money, right? Which I think there's in a lot of people's head that the money that somebody makes, they stole. But that's not what happens. What happens is that they provide a value of in excess of $1 billion, and they keep a fraction of that, right? And so when you say billionaires shouldn't exist, you're saying, well, the value that they create shouldn't exist either. Because that's what happens, right? It's money is a medium of exchange. So when they got that money, they had to give something back to a bunch of other people, right? So when you go in the studio and you make your next album and you make $2 billion off your album, right? It's because people valued that music and they paid you for that, right? You didn't steal them. It was a voluntary exchange. And because it was a voluntary exchange, of free people, right? Using the word freedom, right? It's just an exchange of a value. So when somebody says a billionaire shouldn't exist, they're just like saying, well, these values shouldn't exist. They don't understand. I don't get it. And I think part of that is they're a mixture of, and this is true, they're sick of the crony capitalism.
Sure.
Right? They're conflating stealing, crony capitalism, favoritism with capitalism in general, right? And the rich. And so they're like, eat the rich. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, you want to say something like Calcutta? Like, what do you mean? Like, this guy who's in the lab passionate about rockets and, whatever, what I mean? This guy is going to put us on Mars or save us or give us satellite internet, right? That's not shitty and lift billions and billions of people out of the Stone Ages, right? Because now they have access to cheap internet, right? And services, and they can leverage their life. And he's going to get a fraction of that value and be a billionaire. Like you don't want him to exist. You don't want him to go to work.
Yeah.
You don't want him to provide that value. You don't want that exchange value to happen. Yeah. And so I just, it's just beyond me. It's just crazy.
I think it's a combination of lack of education and critical thinking and just how money works, actually, like what money is, how products are priced, how things are valued, et cetera, just basic free market concepts, but then also just sheer envy and jealousy. I really think it's a combination of those two things primarily. The thing I do always find hilarious about it is when someone will be, tweeting about eat the rich, obviously on Twitter, on their broadband internet from their iPhone 12 Pro Max with as they watch Netflix, drinking their Starbucks and, ordering on Uber Eats. I'm kind of like,
it's kind of crazy. And the main thing is like, I'm not concerned about the ceiling. I'm concerned about the floor.
Yes.
Yes. And so like, if Elon wants to own Mars and he's like a trillionaire, have at it.
Yep.
Have at it. I'm more concerned about the floor.
I'm with you.
So, my things, I get on policies and things that will work, that will actually work, not play lip service, to help raising the floor, right? And so once everybody's at a certain standard, I have no problem with somebody being a quadrillionaire, right? And I still don't have a problem, because that's how we lift people up. Capitalism has lifted millions and millions and millions of people out of poverty, advanced society, and so it's
Why do you think people are so resistant to that? I mean, that what you just said is it's a fact, but people are so. I mean, if you just look at the past 100 years, like look at 1921 up until 2021, even look at certain countries which went from, more communist regimes to embracing capitalism. Look at the progress of China. Look at the progress of all these countries, and even in the West, right? I mean, 100 years ago, the average person in the UK or the average person in the USA was, by today's standards, poor, like living very, very poor. Whereas now, I mean, more people die from eating too much food than from lack of food, and so things have changed. But yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's just a conflation. Like, they do see, the politics of pull, and they're conflating the corruption that they've seen, the unfairness that they've seen, the legacy issues of the past we've seen, right, with capitalism. And I'm like, listen, they're like, slavery bred, they conflate slavery with capitalism, right? Yes. It's like, people were buying and selling humans, but capitalism's not bad. Slavery was, right? Like, and so, it's like, oh, these guys, these corporations, they're getting these like backhand deals, corporates, they're setting up these rules and laws to protect the incumbent. I'm like, yes, that's all bad. Yes. But that's not capitalism, right? That's a perversion which needs to be rooted out. But you're trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater, to use one of the old people saying, like it's. So there's this lack of education, as you're saying, and this inability to separate these things out, right? So I think it's no secret I'm a libertarian, right? I'm not Republican or whatever, and I think that's what's going on here is that people are sick and fed up and not understanding why certain bad things are happening, why these advantages are happening, and they're just like, oh, capitalism bad. If we just get the right people in office, we'll just distribute all the resources evenly, and we'll all be fine. I'm just like, never ever in history has that happened.
Yeah. And no one's had that idea before.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's like I see, especially in Black communities or whatever, they think like we're going to vote the good people in office and everything's going to be fine. It's like, that never happens. These are the institutions, okay, that control the police that you're complaining about. Dude. That institutions that had slavery, that did all
I had this conversation earlier today.
Yeah, and I'm just like, but you want to give them more power. Man. And now they're going to distribute to you guys, us, the minorities, the 14%. Like, oh, somehow we're going to all get uplifted because we elected this person, this person, and this person, and gave them more power. And I'm like, historically, the more power you give them, the more. I'm trying to use the word. The worse off you are. I was going to say a curse word. So, so the worse off you are, and so it just baffles me. Like, people think like, oh, we're going to elect the good people this time, and things are going to change. And I'm like, that doesn't happen.
No,
it's never going to happen.
No, man, it's so interesting. I literally was having this conversation earlier today, and you literally made the exact same point that I did. I was saying, like, whether you look at the USA or you look at a global level, think of all the worst atrocities and all the worst things that have happened, period, right? Yeah. Whether you're talking slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, if you're looking at communism, Nazism, Maoism, Stalin, like all of these things, I'm like, what all these things have in common is they are coordinated by and or condoned by the government. Right. Yeah. So I was saying that without the government, racism is just a bad idea. When the government gets involved with racism, that's when you get genocide. That's when you get slavery of an entire group of people. That's when you get concentration camps.
Systemic killing or systemic laws that lock up 2 million of your people. It's like, who smokes marijuana? Mexicans and blacks. We need some drug laws now. You know what I mean? So. it's really amazing. And I tell people it's like Lord of the Rings. Everybody thinks like if they get the ring, thing is going to be okay. And they don't. I don't know what to say. No, the ring is evil. That is the whole point. The power structure that you're trying to create, and more laws and more power to the government. Like that's the ring. Like it's basically Lord of the Rings. And so I'm more of limited government, less power, less ability to screw things up. And people are like, no, we need more government and more rules. They're going to finally distribute the resources equitably. I'm like, no. You gotta be kidding me, right?
Yeah, and then it's also funny because then when the government rolls back something that it absolutely should have never had in the first place, like people celebrate it, right? And it's like, wait, like
exactly.
they created that problem. And then, it's like we're in this whole lockdown situation, whatever. And it's like people will probably be praising the government when they decide to like let people out their houses and let them go to the gym and go to restaurants. And it's like, they did that to us. Those are our basic freedoms and liberties, which were like, taken. And now we are like, oh, thank you, benevolent government, for letting me go to a restaurant again. And it's just very wacky to me. But there's moving on from that. There's something you mentioned earlier, which, I really am interested in and want to get your take on, which is where you were talking about being concerned about the floor, being concerned about poverty, right? So a lot of people focus on the gap. I'm not particularly interested in the gap when people talk about wealth inequality, but I am concerned about poverty, right? People living in poverty. I think everyone agrees on that. So in terms of lifting the floor and raising people up, what are some things that you think do work or could work in that without, trying to do this socialist nonsense of just confiscating people's money at the top and handing it to people at the bottom with not much thinking to it?
Well, one of the things is getting rid of the red tape, right? Like, I don't, here in the States, there's a lot of licensing laws, right? Okay. That are just there designed to protect incumbents or for them to extract a fee. Like if you're in California and you want to braid hair, and you're good at braid hair, and you start your business, you don't need a license and a course and $1,000 and $600, whatever, to like braid hair and do hair, right? Like that keeps poor people down. Kills the entrepreneurial spirit, right? Because when that person succeeds, they hire people, they got a sweeper, they got this, they're buying equipment, and that keeps people in poverty. If you're in certain states, you're a decorator. You're a great decorator. Decorate your house, but you can't call yourself a decorator unless you pay a fee to this organization, get a license, blah, blah, blah. There are so many anti-competitive regs, rules that make people's heads spin in terms of the barrier for people to lift themselves up out of poverty. I talked to the governor here in St. Thomas. I'm like, we have these business license craps got to go. In Texas, you open up a business, open up a bank account, give yourself a name, DBA, you're in business. Yep. Right? For like a majority of the businesses. You want to sell fruit, whatever, pay your taxes, you're good. Yep. Here, people got to drive down, they got to have your articles of incorporation, blah, blah, blah. Like you barely have high school education, right? What do you know about lawyers and paying lawyer fees and articles of incorporation to open up a fruit stand? You know what I mean? And they have to drive hours downtown. They're not there. It's like the most choking thing that's going on that is stopping people from empowering themselves, right? And then so what winds up happening is then if you're not going to allow them to work, right, by proxy, right, eventually you're going to have to just give them money, right? Because you're destroying commerce, right? Like when you go to Thailand, unemployment is like 1%. Right? Because everybody just starts a business. There's no bureaucracy. You start a business, they're hustle people, they're happy people, etc. You'd be shocked about how much red tape you'd have to go through to do anything, to have your hustle going on.
Yeah. How do you get that? How do you get that message through to people? Because there's a whole alternate side of the aisle that thinks that the way forward on all of this is more government and more interference and more red tape and more regulation and raising minimum wage and doing this and putting in that policy and that policy. I'm very much more from your school of thought, but this is something I sort of discuss and debate.
It's difficult because there's like a lack of economic understanding, or at least wanting to have like if I come out and say no minimum wage, that's a bad idea. That's going to hurt people in a lot of places, right? You catch a lot of heat, right? Like trying to get that message across, and you try to explain to them. It's like, well, if you have a business where you can't pay somebody a living wage, then you should be in business. I said, well, exactly. That's what happens. That's exactly what happens, right? Like that business disappears, right? And the value of that labor is the value of the labor. You can't, I definitely believe in protecting people and not taking advantage of them, but we can't artificially set the value of a job, right? If sweeping this floor is worth $8 an hour, right? Or I'm going to do it my damn self, right? You can't make it 15. I'm just not going to have a sweeper, right? Like you just completely eliminated a whole bunch of positions. And what happens is that people wind up doing 2 jobs or whatever, and it shrinks employment. So yes, the people who are employed, they're happy. They got $15 an hour. But then you have all this other unemployment that goes on. Guess what? Those people who are making those $15 an hour, now they got to take care of those people who are unemployed, right?
Yeah. And again, people don't.
And it starts a cycle, right? Like, and you see it. Like, I think there was don't hang me if I'm wrong on this, but I think it was Hawaii who got a waiver from the minimum wage increase in the Obama administration. They were like, this is going to kill jobs. Yeah. Right. And so it's like, why did they get the waiver? Right. Because the economic principles, you can't legislate around economic principles. It's just, it doesn't, these laws, they're going to operate. Right. And so people are trying to thread the needle. People on the extreme end is like, you got to pay people what they need. I'm like, that's not how it works. Right. Like, I need a rocket ship and a private jet. Like, who does this need, right? Like,
do you know what? Funnily enough, I found works quite well when I've had this discussion with people. Actually, rather than really making my point, is I just go further on theirs, right? So if someone is saying minimum wage should be $15 an hour, I say no, it should be 30.
Yeah,
and then let them see the problem with that.
Yeah, why not 50? Why not? Let's pay everybody $100 or $1,000 an hour, right? And they're like, well, that's too much. So then now we're talking about can we, as people in a room, as bureaucrats, right? Like we're having a good debate, but let's just assume we're in charge of the world. As bureaucrats, right? Can we expertly set the exact market wage, or will the market set it? Right? Will the market set it? And will people that high school kids that want a summer job, will they now have a job instead? No, you can't work because I got to pay $15 an hour, and scooping ice cream, or taking tickets to the movie theater is not $15 an hour. You're out of work. These people are out of work, or my business is gone, et cetera. Like, am I going to be that good, or is the market, through its chaotic process, going to find a better wage? And I'm a believer that the market in each state, in each region, depending on the job, et cetera, is going to be better than us bureaucrats sitting in a room being like, should it be $1,000 an hour? No, maybe 50, no, 40, 15. Let's just go with 15. You know what I mean? And then all kinds of chaos, right?
And it's also interesting because, again, people don't really look at history, and you don't, so if you're looking even in the USA, like I'm not even American, but if you look at the effects of the minimum wage laws when they were introduced in the USA and the particular communities and demographics that they impacted, and you see how it affected Black Americans, for example, then it's like, so again, I'll have someone who's saying, yeah, we need this. And, they'll even be saying, yeah, to like lift up this particular demographic. I'm like, dude, look at.
No, I think some of the minimum wage laws were, at least this is a rumor, and I read about it, but I didn't thoroughly investigate it, was to actually discriminate against people.
Yeah, it was.
Right? And so it's like, you gotta pay your employees $7 an hour, fire all the Black people.
Yeah, literally, that's literally what it was. That's literally what it was, but people don't know that.
Yeah, and so it's and I don't try and get on people that they don't know these things, because people have busy lives, right? They're struggling, they have work. I mean, that's not an excuse that they can't empower themselves and learn about these things. But you and I have been, for whatever reason, I like puzzles, I dig, I research things at night. I'm deep in the weeds on various subjects. So I have this history and I have this understanding that other people may not have. And I think one of the things we have to do to change people's minds is be patient.
True.
Because
True.
I've been fortunate enough, or my life path has taken me down a way where I have all these pieces of knowledge and examples to state my case, where they just have, that guy's $1 zillion and that's not fair. I don't have any money and I can barely eat, right? And that's their frame of reference. So I gotta bring them in on why that is. Why you think it is not the way it is, and how you get lifted out is not the way you think you lifted out. Yeah. And what I try and remind people is we're all on the same side. Yep. I want people happy. I want them to be fulfilled. I want them healthy. I want peace, right? But your way is to make it worse. And I have to somehow explain that to you, right?
Yeah. I think a lot of people have this, I think a lot of sort of statism or authoritarianism comes from people just having I'd say an overly negative view of the general population, right? So people think that if you don't have minimum wage laws, for example, if you don't have a set minimum wage by the state, that people are just gonna, business owners and entrepreneurs are just these vicious people who are gonna like fleece people and have them working in sweatshops and not wanting to pay them at all. And, all of this. So that's typically the argument people make. So, okay, the government needs to be involved in this, in that, and that. Even with something like free speech. I was having this debate with some good friends recently, and I'm the one who's, in my close friendship group, I'm the one who's, a very staunch free speech absolutist, basically. Right. And, they're saying, yeah, but, people say hurtful things, people say hateful things, et cetera. And I'm like, yeah, but who sets the rules? Like, if you start trying to limit that, firstly, there's no limiting principle. It's totally subjective. Everyone's offended by different things. You can't discuss ideas. You can't actually promote underrepresented groups or highlight discrimination, et cetera, if you don't have free speech. I grew up in Saudi Arabia, right? So what they may define as hate speech in Saudi Arabia, right, will be different to what they define as hate speech or offensive speech in this place or that place, and or even who says it, right? What about because one of my friends even said like, oh, but someone shouldn't just be able to walk down the street and call me the N-word, right? And in hindsight, I'm thinking I should have said, well, what if they were black?
Yeah, exactly.
Are you going to start having different rules depending on who says it?
It is. And that's funny you say the N-word, because I just put out a tweet and I was like, we're creating a tonal language where the tone is not audio. It's whoever says it, especially with the N-word, right? Like I drop the N-word all the time amongst my friends, right? But if this other guy drops it, it's inferred he's a racist or whatever. And I think it's really, it's really a weird dynamic, because rap music is heavy in the United States. N-word, your favorite songs, your club bangers, your whatever. And what do you like, humming along and then you stop because you're going to offend this person or whatever? And it's just this very, very weird dynamic. But going back to the free speech thing, it's like when you start trying to put rules and regulations around speech or anything, now you have this committee of bureaucracy, which you're going to trust. To enforce whatever rule set or their common sense of decency committee, which that just never works. No. They're human beings too. They have their biases. They have their sense of pull. They're helping their friends out. They're doing whatever. It's like, eliminate the ring, eliminate the power to,
yeah, exactly. Because if they have the power to do that, look, when a dictator takes power, right? What's the first right that they come for? Free speech, right? They're going to make it illegal to criticize the government or to criticize the ideology or to criticize whatever, right? That's the first step, right? So if you want to install a communist regime or a fascist regime or even some sort of totalitarian religious regime, you create blasphemy laws, heresy laws. You cannot say anything against the ruler.
They go for the journalists. They go straight for the journalists, right?
Straight up,
that's a straight attack on free speech. So I'm with you. I think we're in vicious agreement on free speech, and more power in government structures is generally a bad thing. And I get it. Like when people are talking like going back on the minimum wage, et cetera, they have an outcome to them that is so distasteful that they skew this way towards this solution, right? Like poverty is so bad that I will do this, right? Minimum wage, $1,000 an hour to avoid that. And they don't really understand the consequences on that, or does it really work? Right? It's like a panic move.
Yes.
right? If they just say, "Oh, I hate poverty so much, we're gonna make $1,000 an hour," and then you realize
Mhm.
these people aren't working. Now I got to have another solution. Okay, UBI. Okay, that doesn't. You know what I mean? Like inflation has happened. Now their costs are going structure up. Now what do I do, right? And
Yeah.
so maybe I want to give some leeway. Like maybe some of those solutions and doses may work, right? I just don't think that the structures in place are able to execute, and that the
Yeah.
market is generally the best way.
Yeah.
Generally, not
I
always,
think,
but generally the best way.
yeah, I think what it is with a lot of those ideas, all these things we've touched on, is on a surface level, they sound good. Like on a
Yes.
surface level, it sounds good, right? You know, if a politician comes out and says, we want to raise the minimum wage to $25 an hour, on a very surface level, it sounds like, yeah, okay. You know, if you said it to a 5-year-old, they'd be like, yeah, great, right? Give everyone more money.
High five.
But yeah, but if you think about the economics and you understand supply and demand and how that would affect unemployment, or especially if you run your own business, then you have a keen insight into knowing what that really means. Same with, these hate speech laws, et cetera. Because if you defend free speech, people think like, oh, you're defending hate speech, right? You're defending someone to go around screaming racial or homophobic slurs or whatever. And it's like, no, I'm not saying people should do that. But the alternative of giving the government this ring of, as you've called it, this ring of power to imprison people under the threat of force or violence for words that come out of their mouth. I mean, I live in the UK where free speech is a little bit weird here. People have been arrested for tweets. People have been arrested for jokes. A teenage girl 2 years ago was arrested for posting Snoop Dogg lyrics on her Facebook profile because they contained the N-word, and the police came to her house, right? And I'm like, this this is what ends up happening. This is what ends
Yeah.
up happening. And I mean, I know a guy who got prosecuted, a guy in Scotland. He posted a joke video online, which was intended for his girlfriend, and it actually ended up going viral. And he landed back in the UK. The police came to his house, arrested him, and he was spent many months in court and was eventually prosecuted for a joke. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where we are.
Yeah. That's just crazy. I mean, I'm not condoning certain, like, I'll fight for free speech. I'll die for it. Right. Like, but that doesn't mean I condone everything that comes out of everybody's mouth. I'm just like,
Of
okay,
course not.
that's what I get. Like, that is a consequence of, freedom costs, right? A lot of people think, like, this is what I tell people often, is that freedom isn't just soldiers fighting in some foreign land so you can be free.
Mhm.
Everybody pays the cost. Everybody takes a little bit of risk in order to be free.
Yes.
In the United States, we don't have cameras in our bedrooms and cops on our doors or whatever, right? But we do have an additional risk of being robbed or whatever, or crime, etc., in order for us to be free, right? Not to be molested and harassed. You want free speech? There's a cost, right? If somebody's going to say something hurtful or something you don't like or something that may make you cry or you find distasteful, that is the cost of freedom,
Yes.
right? Freedom isn't free, and it's not just soldiers that bear that risk. Everybody bears that risk. Right? I might get blown up by a terrorist, but I prefer the life of being free, not molested, getting checked everywhere I go, strapped down, everybody looking in my underwear drawer, then versus that risk, right? And we all accept a certain modicum of risk in our lives in exchange for freedom. And I am almost religiously on that side.
Okay.
Of freedom. And I'm like, this is the price we all pay.
Yeah. With that said, I mean, that ties in perfectly to where we are in the world right now with all these ongoing government restrictions and lockdowns and mandates and this and that happening all over the world. I mean, I'd be curious to get your high level take on that.
So, my take has evolved over time. When you first don't know, right? Like I said, the market generally is the best way to solve things, and sometimes it's not. And the time is when you can have a catastrophic outcome, right? And the market can't react as fast, right? So then sometimes you need to ring fence the market and limit certain things, et cetera. But as time has passed, as we understood the nature of the beast, okay, now it's people's choices.
Yes.
Now it's people's choices, right? And people are like, well, what about the tail risk? What if you get sick and you come home and you get your grandmother sick, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are the risks we all take and bear, and everybody has to be responsible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, grandma, my parents, they can be away from people. Don't come in my house,
Mm-hmm.
right? I need to be responsible around them, and I need to be able to take a certain level of risk, and people need to take a certain level of risk. And I think this is a multifaceted problem, right? Like sometimes, you know, you have these lockdowns in certain areas, and the impact, right, on people's lives, psyche, economics,
Mm-hmm.
right, is a greater impact than catching the virus, right? And the spread of the virus.
Mm-hmm.
And these are calculations that people have to make. And I think that each state, each individual, and each other person can make it. And they didn't even do it smart, right? Like everybody focused on lockdown. The real focus is like, well, outdoor activities, outdoor transmission is virtually nil.
Basically nothing.
Right?
Yeah.
So the focus should have been on ventilation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ventilation.
And they've done the complete opposite over here.
No, they don't focus on ventilation. They focus on sticking people in rooms, forcing them to go stay in indoor places and mix, right? And so the mathematics, like, if you look, this is a mixing problem, right? If you look at the mathematics of like a general population freely mixing or creating little isolation buckets and then mixing, the spread is virtually the same.
Yep.
Lockdowns, the way we do them, right? If you want to go China, right, and where you rip people out of their homes, stick them in a hotel, that'll work, okay? Yeah. That will work. But the lockdowns in a free society, they don't work.
No.
And I would have focused on other mitigation measures. Yeah. I would have been like, hey guys, if you don't want to get sick in a room with other people, this is the ventilation you need. This is the air per square feet you need. You need to open up these windows. You need to have this type of purification, et cetera. I think that would have had a much bigger impact.
Yeah.
But, you know, going back into once the knowledge was out, like, hey, we're not going to kill 100,000 people if one person goes outside or whatever. Then it was a matter of each individual state and individual personal responsibility of taking on, not forcing this to shut down and forcing that to shut down, et cetera. I believe in mitigation measures. I think people should be responsible. I think wearing a mask is a good idea. It definitely, any chance, if you lower it from a 70% chance to a 60% chance, that's a free option, right? So, but people don't want to do that, that's fine.
Yeah.
So I'm not, lockdowns just aren't working.
No, they're not. And the data on that is it's clear. You know, if you look at the USA state by state, look at the death rate per million from or associated with the virus, states that locked down, states didn't lock down, there's no correlation. There's no correlation whatsoever.
You know, people argue that, the lockdown's in response to the wildness or whatever, but like LA's been locked down enough and it is the worst county. One of the most locked down places is the worst county in spread. Because what happens is you just have people mixing indoors, friend to friend, right? They're not outdoors doing activities where you're going to have less mixing. They're not getting the messages, stay home, lock down, right? Don't go to work. The message isn't ventilate your house so that when you have guests over, you know what I mean, and they're sick, you're not going to get sick. It's just backwards to me.
And take care of your health. You know, how can you boost your immunity? Take vitamin D, take vitamin C, take zinc, exercise, eat a healthy diet, right? We've known for a year now that besides age, the biggest risk factor is what? Obesity.
Correct.
Right? And no one wants to talk about that, maybe because it's not politically correct or whatever. And I'm just like, look, are you trying to play politics here, or are you actually trying to help people? You know?
I mean, like literally being healthy is kind of like the number one thing you can do. You have a strong immune system when you're healthy. That's what you're doing. The vaccines that we're taking right now, that's to boost your immune system. But one of the best ways you can boost your immune system, get enough sleep, don't be obese, don't have high cholesterol, you know, all these things that you can make these choices, right? Like
stop fat shaming, Bill. You're fat shaming.
No.
But that's what people say. That's the thing. That's how crazy we are.
I'm not. Yeah, it is kind of crazy. Like it's like, don't be obese if you want to be healthy. Like if you want to choose to be obese, like that's fine. Just realize you are now in a different risk category. You now have you have the number one comorbidity, right? Because obesity and diabetes is one of the same.
And that's even more interesting in the UK, right? Because in the UK, we do have nationalized healthcare. So in the UK, people can't actually really pull the, it doesn't affect anyone else kind of thing, right? So if someone wants to yell at me for, I don't know, not wearing a mask or doing what they think is right, I'm like, okay, well, by that same token, I can yell at you for being fat, because obesity is putting more strain on the NHS than people not wearing masks is. So I'm like, if you want to play that game, people can kind of do that.
It's kind of weird when people talk like I think it's like 60% of healthcare costs annually are diet and choice related in the United States, because all the chronic diseases are, and then 95% of diabetes is diet induced.
Yes.
In the States, right?
Yeah.
And then all the other chronic diseases, knee replacement surgery, blah, 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 from being obese. So when people talk about here, because you have the national health system, people say, oh, we need to have one healthcare, whatever. And I was like, yeah, but certain people don't want to fund your lifestyle.
Yes.
Right? Exactly. If you want to go ride a motorcycle, wear no seatbelt, 100 miles an hour, have at it. Just don't make me pay for the consequences, right?
Exactly.
And so it's easy when you give the motorcycle example, because people are like, I don't ride a motorcycle, whatever. But it's harder when people say, well, it's the same thing when you eat, you get out of shape, you get obese, you eat Twinkies every day or whatever it is, right? By choice. Same thing, same concept as riding a motorcycle. You're making these choices that have to pay for it, smoking, whatever it is, right? And so that's a difficulty when you're trying to say, oh, we're just going to create a pool and we have a national health center. And it's like, okay, we don't have enough money to cover this pool. So now we're going to let the bureaucrats ration what's covered and what's not.
Yeah.
Right? And now we're going to ration by delaying it, right? Like you need to get an MRI or whatever.
Oh, that was already happening over here, but now that's at a whole new level now in the UK.
Right. So it's not possible. So you leave the bureaucrats to rationalize the service, right? Out when you put everybody in. So yeah, everybody's covered at a lower level quality, and we say we covered, but you need this, come in 3 weeks, etc. And then everybody else is subsidizing. The healthy people is subsidizing, choices of other people. People who make proper choices are subsidizing the bad choice people, right? And then I get the argument, well, they didn't have access to clean food or whatever. I'm just like, stop.
Yeah, it's complicated.
I don't have walking's free. And you need to do that. It's funny. I had my doctor on on the book, and he was talking about yes, to get quality organic food, etc. It can be daunting, right? And you still have to do your best to eat the proper calories and keep the number of calories in balance. Yeah. But he's like, but walking is free.
Yeah. To be honest, the whole idea that healthy food is way more expensive than junk food, I don't buy that at all. I don't buy that at all. Unless you have no idea how to cook. If you don't know how to cook, that's a whole different thing. But if you know how to cook, then cooking, even buying expensive food and cooking it is typically going to be cheaper than getting a takeaway or going to a restaurant or something. So you'll have people eating out twice a day and then saying, oh, I can't afford healthy food. And I'm like, you eat out 10 times a week.
I find when I'm having these discussions and debates that people love the victim story.
Yes.
They love to romanticize the victim story, but they don't have, and he never had a chance, and he couldn't do this. And that's why 33% of us are obese or 40 and growing. That is not why. These numbers, can you find one example or two examples of X, Y, and Z? I'm sure you can. There's 330 million Americans, right? We're going to find, it's like if 0.01% is crazy, we're going to find a lot of crazy people, right? So, so we're going to always find this extreme example, but that is not the norm, and that is not how you should be setting policy. That's not how you should be setting your rules. That's not how you should be operating on it. You should operate on hey, we can't be subsidizing this behavior, and we need to help these people, let them know, be honest with them what the consequences are of this behavior. And if they still choose to do that, that's fine. You want to ride a motorcycle screaming "wee" with no helmet? Have at it, dude. Yeah. I am not paying your hospital
bill. So Bill, I want to be respectful of your time as well. So before we wrap this up, what is it that you would like people to know, or what is something that you have learned or something you've realized that you felt was life-changing, which you'd like to pass on to anyone who's listening to this?
Yeah, I think the main thing in the book is like, no matter what your resource base is, like how much money you have, right? Like when you're going to drive somewhere, you take out Google Maps or Waze or whatever, it's a much more efficient, enjoyable trip, right? You're like, oh, I want to stop at a movie theater on the way. It does that, it routes it, boom. And now you have a nice, efficient trip. Avoids the traffic and the pitfalls. And so the same way you would model a trip to grandma's house, right? I want you to model your trip to the grave. We're all going to die, right? And a lot of us are behaving like we're never going to die. We're never going to deteriorate. And so I want people to get off autopilot, think about their life from now to the day they die, and break it up in segments and be like, what experiences do I want to have from 34 to 40, 40 to 45, 45 to 50, 60, right? You write down your spiritual ones, your educational ones, your health goals, your leisure, hedonistic, charitable, whatever it is. Break them down in each bucket and start looking at your life, right? And then from that, you'll be able to see, okay, this is where I need to deploy resources, and this is what I need to be this is what I'm saving money for, right? Because a lot of people just go, saving, working, doing whatever, without thinking about what I want out of this life, right? And you can't know everything, right? Because life is discovery. Like you go to Thailand and you're like, holy shit, I got to go back and see this temple, and now I'm into this, right? So there's got to be some potluck in there. But the more you model your life from now to the grave, the more fulfilling your life will be. And I'm about net fulfillment over net worth.
Amen. I love that, Bill. Thank you so much, man. Bill,
Thanks.
It's been amazing talking to you, man.
Great talking.
So many great insights. And before we go, where can people find you online?
Online, I'm at BP22 on Twitter. I'm in the Twitterverse. I like to mix it up. I like to debate. You can, talk. I generally respond to almost anybody unless you're just trolling, whatever. But as long as we're not shaming each other, we can debate all day long. On Instagram, I'm at Bill Perkins. You can find me there.
Nice one, Bill. Thank you so much for coming on the Real Talk with Zuby podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.